I'd love to kind of get into the story of how it all started. The story of like the growth of the podcast and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the other big one is always monetization, or how did you take the podcast and the traffic and turn it into a business? Literally, if we talk about spirituality or wherever the hell it goes, I think that still too is like getting into the mindset stuff, you know? So
absolutely. I wish I had like a fascinating story of a master plan like coming to fruition, but unfortunately a lot of it was stumbling around in the dark and falling into it more than like having a plan for monetization and having a plan for growth. What's so fascinating about the story looking back now over 12 years is it really is a story of just testing, just little tests here and there, and always doing them. So not just like pinning everything on, okay, if we just hit this one big thing, we'll reach success. But it's just this endless amount of test this, test this, test this. Like even today before you showed up at the office, I'm like running all these little split tests on the website with all this traffic, especially targeting specific traffic sources. And at the very beginning, that's essentially what it was. You know, we were hanging out in Ann Arbor, Jordan and myself, and we were going out regularly. He was in law school, I was in graduate school at the time, and we both felt kind of lost. Like college was fun for us. We had friends, but they all moved away and went on to do some pretty awesome stuff. But we were hanging out in Ann Arbor, going to graduate school after going to undergrad in Ann Arbor, and we envisioned it to be the same. Like, this is just going to be like undergrad 2.0. I'm going to be smarter. I'll be a little bit older. I'll be able to go to the cooler bars in Ann Arbor. And we realized that like graduate school is not like that at all. People really don't have lives, or their lives may include a family now, right? So a lot of my classmates, especially because I was studying a cancer biology PhD, they wanted to be immersed in research. They were not going out socializing. They were certainly not going out to bars and hitting on women or talking to strangers and trying to build relationships. So we both kind of came to this realization separately, and we had a mutual friend in Ann Arbor who we were hanging out with, and we felt as we were going out that this PUA scene was sort of taking off, and people were asking us, oh, have you seen this? You read this? Oh, it sounds like you're using this material. We just felt like we were having the same conversations out in a bar. And I know we've hung out, and you know, when people want to go that direction and ask you for dating advice in a bar, it's kind of the last place you want to give that conversation, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I'll tell you brunch tomorrow.
Get you all logical yeah.
But it's like, I want to have fun. And we found having this similar conversation, people asking us, how'd you cut the line? How do you know the manager and the owner of this place? And there was one distinct story where we were out at this little lounge in Ann Arbor, and the owner, who we had got to know because we were regulars and we always were bringing people and having fun, he saw that we were there with a table full of people, and he went back in the kitchen and he told the chef to bake some cookies. Now, there are not cookies on the menu. Like, you can't buy cookies. And he brings this plate of piping hot cookies and sets it down at our table. And you can imagine warm cookies in a bar when everyone's been drinking, like everyone looks, who are these guys? So we started to get a little bit of a reputation for being the partiers, being the guys who go out, attracting some of these guys who are interested in dating in PUA. And on a lark, we were like, hey, what if we just record this conversation? And I literally, to show you how big of a dork I am, I was literally on slashdot.org, which is basically like a hacker tech blog from like way back in the day. And they had written an article about podcasting and how it's this new media.
When was this? Like what year?
This was 2007.
Wow. So you guys started super at the start of it. Nice.
Yeah. And, you know, even podcasting then, there was no real like iTunes top 100 or anything that people really could compare how a podcast was doing. It was literally design an XML feed and put it on a website. So I was like, hey, we should start a podcast so we could record these conversations that we're having over and over again, and then we can just share them with people and they could hear the conversation instead of us having to say the same thing. So we went home that night and hopped on Amazon, ordered a little mixer and some microphones, knowing nothing about audio, and plugged it in my basement. And we started recording, and we realized that you can't really record next to a furnace that's running in a Michigan winter. So it'd kick on and be really loud, and we'd have a great conversation over some gin and tonics, and then we'd go check out the audio, and we're like, oh, shit, this audio sucks. Like, what's all this scratching? So we got to understand audio editing and audio engineering a little bit, And we realized that, okay, if we're going to launch this thing, you know, we have full-time gigs, basically, law school, graduate school. We need some content ready to go, and we'll do it weekly. So we recorded about 6 hours of content, edited those 6 hours down to 6 episodes, and we launched. And I built the site on Blogspot, and my cousin helped design a logo for us. That was 2 P's back to back. It was the Pickup Podcast, and it basically grew from there. And what's so funny about that is, you know, the site's up and you get like 2 downloads and 5 downloads, and you're all excited. And then it's like, okay, what can I do to get more downloads? How can I get more downloads? And, you know, this was before there were so many podcasts that you can just go on other shows and do ad swaps and all this stuff. So we're like, okay, what are some ways that we could get this podcast moving in the right direction? And we're like, well, you know, we just need more people in Ann Arbor to hear it. Like, if there were just more people listening to us in Ann Arbor, we'd be semi-successful. So we went to Vistaprint, and you know, Vistaprint gives you the free 100 business cards. And we got 100 business cards printed that said pickuppodcast.com. And it said, you see her standing there. She looks at you. What next? And our tagline was "Got Game?" ? And we stacked these business cards all over men's urinals throughout Ann Arbor, because we knew our target demographic, right?
Nice.
And we'd go in the bathroom, and sometimes they'd be like strewn all over the floor and like in the toilet, and then sometimes they'd be gone. And we're like, okay, let's just keep passing them out. And about 2.5, 3 months later, we checked our downloads like we did every day, and it was just massive, like hockey stick level downloads. And we're like, what is going on? Like, how did this thing catch fire? And we're like super excited. And we're like, okay, what happened? And we couldn't figure it out. And we were excited, obviously, that it was growing. Still hadn't figured out a way to make money off of it. We were spending money on hosting now, and the bills were growing, of course. And we were out in Ann Arbor at a bar talking to some people, and this guy walks up to us, and he's like, hey, I know you guys from somewhere. And we're kind of like, I don't know, I've never met you before, man. He's like, no, I certainly know you from somewhere. And we're just kind of like shrugged it off. And it's a table full of women. We're like, dude, can you leave us alone? Like, I don't know you. Sorry. And I'm going to the bathroom, and he grabs me. He's like, you guys have a podcast. And I was like, whoa, please, like, keep that down. Like, we're kind of in with these girls. And he was like, no, I got to tell you a little story. Like, I love your show. You have no idea. So we're shooting the shit, and he's like, I work at Google, and Google was in town because they had just opened a new location. And he's like, I saw your business card in the bathroom, and I was jamming out on your show, and I shared it with my friend at Apple, and you guys made the top 100. And I was like, wait, what?
Really? Wow.
And they had featured us on the editor's choice. So back in the day then, the editors for the iTunes store were actually just Apple engineers. So they were just picking like their favorite podcasts. And that visibility just skyrocketed our growth in the very beginning. And then all of a sudden, you know, we had this deluge of people wanting to get on the show. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I get on? I want an interview on the Pickup Podcast. And most of them were internet marketers. Most of them were selling their dating products. So we're inviting all these people on the show. We're getting to pick their brain and learn as well. And sometimes learn that we know more than we thought we knew. And with all of that, these guys were making a killing off of us. Like, just making all this money.
I was going to say, were you even taking a cut, or were you just like,
had
hey,
no
we got
idea.
guests? Yeah,
had no idea.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, Carlos Zuma, after his interview, emailed us and was like, hey, do you guys get your affiliate link? And we're like, what's an affiliate link? He's like, yeah, you know, I'll give you half of everything you sell. And we were like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, you haven't been doing affiliates with all these other guys? And we're like, no. He's like, yeah, you might want to look into this. So then we realized, holy cow, you know, we had distribution. We didn't have a product.
How many downloads were you getting at this point?
At this point, it was like 30,000, 40,000 downloads an episode.
Nice.
And, you know, for a lot of guys, that's a massive email list. Yeah. And the one thing that I could tell you about podcasts is that engagement is much better than most other media sources right now, and even back then, because you're really in the audience's head, you're in their ears, versus email, which we know, and especially over the last decade, less and less email are being read and being acted on. So we had a rabid audience who were buying all these other people's dating products, and we ran into the Pickup 101 guys. And we really enjoyed their stuff. We thought it was more in line with who we wanted to be. And we're like, okay, let's figure out how we can do some partnerships. And that's when we really got introduced to this whole idea of like boot camps and like, wow, you can actually charge thousands of dollars to learn this stuff in person. So we had our audience at this point asking us, hey, can you give us some coaching advice? Can you share some of your secrets? I love the show. And we're like, no, that's not what we do. We're just, hosts. We're trying to learn like you. And they're like, no. We want coaching from you. So we're like, okay, well, we can't go anywhere to do this coaching. Maybe we could just do it over Skype. And sure enough, people start signing up for $150 an hour.
Nice.
And I'm sitting there in graduate school and realizing like, what the heck am I doing here? I got a guy in Boston who wants to pay me, $600 for 4 sessions because he's trying to get himself out there after a divorce. These conversations are far more fun. This is more interesting than what's going on in the lab. So we started to get pulled into this whole world of, hey, we could start a coaching business, and the podcast could be lead gen for our business instead of lead gen for all these affiliates business. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we had done some affiliate stuff that didn't go well, and as you know, a lot of these internet marketers, they have terrible customer service, if any, right? They just care about collecting the credit card information. They don't care about refunds or chargebacks. So, building an audience, especially a podcast audience, you build a relationship with your audience and your tribe. And we were getting requests, hey, you recommended this and I didn't get my money, or the product stinks. What's wrong with you guys? Why are you trying to make money off us? So we basically turned down affiliates at that point and said, all right, let's just start our own thing and focus on what we're good at, which is being more natural, right? The movement was, how do you be more natural? How do you move away from, some of the more outlandish stuff that we all think about when we think about PUAs? So with that, we started doing some coaching workshops with David Wygant out in New York. And that's when we got introduced to, thousands of dollars of boot camps that we could charge for, that we could sell our coaching services for and monetize. And Jordan had relocated to New York and was starting his law career. And he was like, hey, if we could find some coaches, the podcast had now grown to, I think it was about 50, 60,000 was our audience. So we're like, hey, we got a good audience. We're doing pretty well with our phone coaching. What if we really ramp things up and do some in-person coaching? So that's when we met Johnny and this guy, Josh, and they both basically helped us create the curriculum that became the boot camp that we've been running for the last 10 years.
Nice. So it's really organically all happened there.
Yeah, it's been, obviously looking back on it, there are some things that, serendipitously popped for us. A lot of it was, as I said, just trying a bunch of different things, right? You get enough irons in the fire, one of them is going to heat up. And we've sort of continued that exact same thing to this day. We're constantly testing and trying stuff.
So how did you, I noticed a lot of people have issues when it comes to the free content, putting content out. Plus, it sounds like you, with no past sort of entrepreneurial experience, marketing experience, sales experience, it's like that's the challenge of how do you create everything else, which is the real part of the business, and not letting this fall off. So did you ever have times where like it fell off for a month, or were you guys like, no, vigilant, this has to keep going? And kind of what did that look like in kind of the early days?
Yeah. So the one thing that we realized pretty early on in podcasting was consistency really mattered. I think in the very beginning, we missed like, I want to say 1 or 2 weeks. And we saw that next week downloads
Total
dipped.
drop off. Yeah.
And we realized that, if we're going to do this, we got to consistently keep it going. Otherwise, it's going to die on the vine. And at this point, we were one of the first dating podcasts. So to give you an idea, like when we started this whole thing, Fast Seduction approached us because they're like, hey, there's no one else in the space doing this. And then all of a sudden we partnered with them, and then everyone else started doing some podcasts. And what we realized was most guys would, launch 4 or 5 episodes and then, go travel, go hang out in Europe for a month, run some boot camps, and then be like, oh, I got to do that podcast thing again. And then, they'd launch another episode or two and they're like, I don't have any downloads. Mm-hmm. So consistency was definitely key, and making sure that we're always delivering. And the second thing was we always tried to put out our best content. And, I'm sure there may even be some people listening to this who are like, I did an interview with them and it didn't air.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We did not air everything that we recorded.
Cool. So you had like good screening in place. Yeah.
We'd look at each other after we recorded it and be like, hey, how did that feel to you? And if it just didn't feel like it resonated, or if it didn't feel like we learned anything or got anything out of it other than like a pitch. And again, in the beginning of the podcast days, most people didn't even know what it was. So they're coming on and they're like, I'm going to give my talk. I'm going to just talk about my slides. It's like, no, podcast has to be a conversation. So a lot ended up on the cutting room floor, and being diligent about the content and the guests that we were bringing on allowed us to build a lot of brand equity, which now is obviously becoming incredibly valuable.
So did you have a queue then going? Because if all of a sudden that podcast, like you did an interview and it wasn't good and it had to go out next week, have you always had kind of a month ahead queue? Or I'm sure now obviously it's way more professional, but what can, again, because so many people I think they just don't have those processes in place either. So right. I feel like you've been doing this for over a decade now. So I guess if I could steal a couple of these sort of processes, we're in this amazing studio. That would be one of them, like having a good team to help you out and things like that. Maybe what would be a couple other ones that have helped you along the way?
I definitely think audio quality has always been important to us, and that has been a game changer. In fact, we got some feedback early on. We were, I can't remember the guest. It was like social something. Anyways, he met us in New York, and we did the interview in my sister's New York City apartment. It was a 5th floor walk up, railroad style apartment. And we were in this tiny kitchen, and window panes super thin. And it was just siren, siren, siren. And we got a bunch of negative reviews about audio content, like, oh, their audio quality, like this is terrible. And we took that to heart, like, hey, we need to invest in better microphones. So we need to make sure we're cleaning the audio. And we were looking at all these plugins and stuff to make the audio sound good. So I would definitely say anyone starting out, audio quality is going to be important. You're in people's ears, and especially now when you could dial up anything on your phone with high quality 4K HD video, like it's expected that the quality is there. So scrapping episodes that don't have good quality was important. So engineering is definitely one. The second thing is preparation. We want to come at it with the conversation that they're not going to get elsewhere, especially now in a world where everyone and their grandma is starting a podcast. Are you adding something or to the space, or are you just having the same conversation that they could hear on Joe Rogan, they could hear on Tim Ferriss, etc.? So having an angle, I think, for anyone starting out is also really important.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was listening to an interview with Mark Andreessen, and he was talking about how the next wave, he's like, no, it's not augmented reality and virtual. At someday, VR will be there, but just it's going to still be 10 years away. And what he said actually was because of the AirPods, we're actually moving back to audio being the main sort of transference path, because everyone just has those little AirPods on at work, and your boss doesn't know what you're listening to. And so, on the one hand, it's the challenge of there's so many podcasts out there, but also it's like there's a shift, I feel, back. I don't know, have you noticed anything, as a business more per se? I know at one point you guys were thinking about moving more towards video. Also, like, I do think there's a intimacy with video because they see your face and things like that. I guess just from a business perspective, you have, let's say, redundancy, kind of splitting it off so you don't only just have one mediums, but also kind of cutting edge what's moving forward here. I just love to hear kind of your take on, like, no, we're doubling down on the podcast, or if you're starting off, you're basically screwed at this point, or like,
I certainly, there's plenty of room to grow in the podcast world. And, we're fortunate enough to be here at Cast with the studio that they're building out. And obviously there are people entering the space and having great results. So I don't think that it's so competitive that you shouldn't start one. I think the important thing to realize is that you want to own the content and the platform as much as you can. Obviously, over the years, we've been dinged by Google, and we saw our search ranking drop, and we're like, hey, this is our website, but they control the traffic. Obviously, Vine has come and gone, Twitter is hot, and now it's not as hot. So, I feel like you're always on shaky ground when you only invest in one platform. the podcast world is dominated by iTunes and Spotify. So, you want to make sure that to the best of your ability, you own the content and you're distributing it on multiple platforms in case one of those decides to ding you. I mean, we were having a conversation earlier about what's going on with PUAs and some of these video hosting sites, right? Mm-hmm. Who now they're in breach of their terms. So I think that's always important, is understanding that, anytime you have a one-legged business, any change in that platform could destroy your business. I would say the other thing for us, for those that are starting out, is, record yourself on audio at least 10 hours and sift through that content, listen to it, and only release your best stuff in the beginning. You're mentioning like this free content wave. Our mindset has always been, and it's just the way the world works, and it has been working for years now, is that information is free, implementation and the coaching is where the money is made. So, everything you learn on the podcast, you're going to learn in the boot camp too, but you're going to have a coach looking over your shoulder and telling you're doing it wrong. And, we heard this great quote: practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And, you could listen to hundreds of hours of our podcast and go out and implement some things. And if you're implementing it wrong, then it's going to become permanent. And now you're going to have that as a hang up and you're not going to be getting the results you want. So we've always given out our best content freely and tried our best to guard every piece of content that goes out, especially on the podcast, so that we feel really confident and really happy with it. And I think that's been a huge driving force. And, we had a very unique opportunity in New York to actually land a show on Sirius XM radio, and having no radio experience, like going from, hey, we're going to just turn on some microphones and hang out in my basement, to, okay, we're in a studio next to Howard Stern, and how professional media is produced, you realize just how important the value of that high quality content is, and how much these studios are willing to spend to get that level of content. So I think as long as you find a platform that you're the best at, like double down on that, but make sure that your content is distributed on as many platforms as possible from there. So, we'll repurpose the video on YouTube, we'll cut it down for Instagram, and obviously try to grow our reach. But we do think that podcasts in general, to that exact point, people are consuming more and more. And what I found, which is so fun now, is like, you never find anyone who listens to just one podcast. I feel like when you open that door to podcasts, you're going to find a whole new world of education and information. And the more partnerships, the more collaboration that you can inspire in the beginning, the more likely you are to end up on someone's playlist.
Nice. Yeah, actually, there's something I've been thinking about personally, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Related to, for me with video, is actually pretty funny. So I did my first product ever, it was in 2012. And when you're in the whole world of going out, talking to girls, you get this huge ego. And I'm like, man, I'm just like the best coach. I'm so engaging and everything like that. And then all of a sudden I recorded this product, like the first hour of it. And I watched myself on camera. And it was just the most boring, I didn't have any charisma. And luckily at the time I was living in Milwaukee. So I actually drove down once a week to Second City in Chicago and did the whole improv training. And it was just such a huge help for video and stuff like that, And I was thinking, now that I've been getting, great guests like yourself and stuff like that, and the podcast is really growing, I'm like, I need to step up my podcasting sort of like radio host voice. And so I thought even, here in LA, going and doing some sort of, like radio voicing shit or whatever, or like narration stuff. Did you do any of that sort of work, or did you study anything?
I did not. So I probably don't have a voice for radio. But I do think in general that coaching has allowed us to achieve the results we have over the last decade. So to that point, when we were in New York and we were getting a bunch of media exposure, we hired a video coach who taught us how to act on camera and gave us some tricks to handle your nerves before, lights, camera, action, especially when you're going on live television and, the audience is massive. So we did training in that area. I've also done a ton of public speaking training, and I feel like that's carried over quite a bit. And the other big thing, to be honest, is edit your own audio. And you're going to find all the noises you make, all the filler words you use, all of the colloquialisms you fall back on when you're not really paying attention, you're not as engaged. And, to my point earlier, add to the conversation, bring something to this podcast world that they're not hearing elsewhere. Like when we're just recycling the same questions and phoning in interviews and not really thinking, how is this going to impact the audience that I'm building? That's really when you're going to struggle.
I think, I've two ways to kind of put this out there. What I've noticed for me lately has really been the collaborations have been one of the best things to really grow the channel. Because obviously, like you said, you have one podcaster, other podcaster. I think you guys are at a level where maybe that doesn't even impact you guys as much. But what would you say kind of for somebody in the early stages for if they're looking to grow? And so that would be kind of one question. And on the other side of that too, it sounds like now you're in a position where people come to you, but are you still actively reaching out, and what does that process look like to get, okay, I want to get some best-selling author on the channel, or like, again, you guys had Kobe and things like that. I'm just kind of interested in what some best practices would be for reaching out to people.
Yeah, I think it is important both ways, right? To try your best to reach out to get on other shows. And, we've always taken the stance that there's no show too small. So, I certainly don't think we're big enough. I certainly think we can grow. So not turning down opportunities, even if you think someone is smaller. And I think that's one thing that we realized along the way is, there are so many times where we're like, oh yeah, we're so far ahead and, I don't need to do that, or oh, that's too small. And then all of a sudden we see that person like jump 3 levels because their content went viral. And, when you take that very competitive, scarcity minded stance, as obviously we talked about in dating, everything else, abundance wins the day. So understanding that if you're working on growing something, being collaborative is the easiest way to shortcut a lot of these things. So it's funny, we were having a meeting earlier today talking about ways we can grow the show. So I'm still having meetings team-wide trying to figure out what we can do to grow the show. And we keep coming back to collaborations. Some of the biggest collaborations we did in the beginning that grew the show, Art of Manliness was a big one, Fast Seduction was one. All these collaborations with people who may have a podcast, or maybe they're on YouTube and they don't have a podcast presence, and you figure out a way, hey, I could give you some great content that you can just use on your YouTube channel. You don't even have to quote me or anything like that, but be helpful and be giving in that, instead of coming in and just asking right away. The other thing that I've found being inundated with a lot of requests to come on is the more copy and paste it is, the less likely I am to respond. So, I get inundated with interview requests that I know are just complete blasts, and they haven't oriented themselves at all to what our show is about. They clearly haven't listened because the guest is so far out of the realm of what we would talk to, and those go straight to the trash. So, when you're pitching, you want to keep it succinct, and I like to think of it as 3 parts, and learned this through Tim Ferriss, so obviously everyone's heard of Tim. It's offer value, be clear on what you need, and then tie down to some clear time that they can act on, right? So what happens is either we ask for everything right away, and we then expect that they're just going to drop everything and do it, which obviously when you're reaching out to people, they're busy too. So you want to frame it in a way of like, this is how I'm helping you. And then you want to give them a clear opportunity to say, yes, I can do this, or no, I can't do this. The worst thing you can do is like, oh, we'll schedule time. And then all of a sudden you're playing assistant and matching calendars. Like, give them options, make it actionable. And typically I'm responding to those. So, and we've used, virtual summits, speaking on stage to grow the show. I'm heading out to Atlanta tomorrow to go talk. And all of those opportunities are opportunities to promote the podcast. So there is no, I just have to go on podcast to promote it. You can go on someone's YouTube channel to promote it. You can do an Instagram live together to promote it. There are so many different ways that you can interface with all these platforms to share your message on growing whatever platform that you're on.
I like that. Yeah, because it's still like, it's not the easiest platform to grow through advertising or something. You can't just go straight ad to podcasts. But I like how you said that about the other platforms too, Was it like a little granular thing when you're reaching out? Do you do that through an assistant, or is that you with your email when you're bringing people on?
I'm reaching out.
Okay, cool.
Typically.
And have you tested both, or just?
Well, I'll be honest. What actually has worked more for us recently is using social media. So
just like IMing someone on Instagram
DMing,
or something? Yeah,
especially on Twitter, Instagram. You tend to actually get to the people that you need to talk to, whereas email, you're getting lumped in with everything else, and obviously people are being pitched all the time. So I've had, now I'm probably gonna get a few of these after this, but I've had
DMs, some
little videos sent to me through Instagram of like, hey, here's how I can help you. Check this out. Or I thought of you, and you know, I'm engaging in that versus my inbox, which, you know, some days I just like, I can't deal. So looking for the easiest path. And then be honest, you know, go to events, do some FaceTime, you know, heading down to San Diego next week for traffic and conversion. And a lot of it is going to be exactly that. Like, and this is what we teach in our boot camps is, you know, the better you are in person, the easier it's going to be to grow your network. You know, everyone tries to find the digital shortcut, and everyone tries to find like, oh, I don't have to leave the house, and I can just blast people, or I can get an assistant or a VA and just do it. It's like, no, the strongest connections I've made to this day are still the in-person, face-to-face, having a real conversation. So I'm always trying my best to make that happen. It's how we met, you know, through Till, and it's how you've met some people in my network. I've met people in your network is face-to-face. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we would have interacted as much if we had just stuck to digital. So
it probably never happened.
Yeah, that is the cheat code that no one wants to do.
Yeah.
Right? They're looking for all the other little ways of like, well, what if I have this great CTA in my email, or what if I, you know, figure out this perfect video message to send? It's like actually walking up to someone at an event and having the face-to-face conversation. You know, you're talking about video and intimacy. There's nothing more intimate than in person. Mm-hmm. And that's why for the last decade, we've focused on how do we grow those soft skills so that we can feel comfortable in the situations? Because I know I've felt awkward as an introvert there. I know I've dreaded going to networking events. And now I go in with a plan. I know exactly what I need to do to calm my nerves. I know exactly what I need to do to strike up a conversation, take the pressure off me. And then I know that the meat of all of that is in the follow-up. Mm-hmm. And that's another big one.
I was going to say, yeah. I'd love to get a little granular there too. Yeah. What's that look like?
Living out here in LA, you know, I'm sure you've noticed this moving from the Midwest. Everyone says, yeah, totally, I'm in. Like, yes to everything when it's a solid maybe. And
yeah, it's like the LA, like, yeah, unless another better, cooler party comes out.
Exactly.
Then,
you know, everyone's got FOMO, everyone's got the next best thing. But what ends up happening is you just say yes, but you don't actually follow up. And the follow-up after those face-to-face meetings, after those events, are where the magic really happens. And, you know, it's how we ended up here in the studio. Colin followed up. Everyone that I know that I built a relationship with actually followed up. I could tell you that there are hundreds and thousands of people at this point who, you know, had a great idea, had something that could have worked, but didn't follow up. So close those loops. You know, if you're going to take the time to walk up, strike up a conversation, to reach out over email, close the loop, close the deal, follow up, follow through. And it's funny, Johnny and I always joke about this, but we are the follow-up guys. So when you say, hey, you could sleep on my couch. Well, 12 years ago, we were taking you up on that offer. We were sleeping on your couch. Like, we're the guys who try our best to keep our word and try our best to follow up. And I think that is an area where a lot of people struggle. They have a ton of ideas. They're getting pulled in a ton of different directions. And if you can follow up with people, you'll find you close more deals, you grow your list, you grow your business.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's it's been interesting moving out here, and it was you know, because I moved to Chicago 5-6 years ago too, and I could see this sort of playing out to where people just have their defined sort of paths that they're taking, and so you need to kind of break your way into that. And so if you think you can meet someone once, no matter how great you come across, they just go back to their old routines. And I think a big part of it too, people are they take it personally of thinking, why am I not in that group thread with all their other friends? Like, we had a good time. Am I not cool enough? And then all the self-worth and the self-doubt things kick in. And so I think you just have to have that sort of, you know what, I'm going to just blazingly just keep plugging away and just plowing through this. And the same process like with dating and everything, right? You got to plow through a little bit to build that relationship at the start.
Persistence.
Yeah,
you know?
And persistence.
At the end of the day, you can't expect everything to hit just on the first try. That's not how life works. And the most persistent ones are the ones who end up succeeding. You know, we've had, or over the last year alone, we've talked to some really interesting guests who shared stories around exactly that, persistence, of how they failed, they were told no, they had doors slammed in their face, and they persisted. And a lot of us, you know, take that first negative as a sign of like, oh, I got to give up, or oh, I shouldn't do that, or oh, they don't like me. When in reality, a lot of this dismissal that we're feeling is simply because we're inundated with open loops, and it's just hard for everyone to keep things juggling and keep things moving forward. So just assuming immediately that it's personal and it's something on you is the wrong way to look at it.
Do you guys have any guests that you've had on that you really had this sort of like the dream 10 clients, and you're not clients, but like guests, and you're just hitting them up once a month, like Richard Branson or some shit like that, and you're just trying to do whatever it takes, and you've gotten some of these people on? Or
yeah, I mean, over the years, we could say Shaquille O'Neal was one, Russell Brand was another one that we were working for literally years.
You just
Stone Cold
once a
Steve
month,
Austin turned us down, and
Okay.
and you know, we're like, hey, you have a podcast too. Why can't you come on the show? So, you know, that persistence over time, and presenting a new angle, right? If someone says no, like a clear no, then come at it with something other than what you just tried, right? It's like going out to the bar and using the same line over and over and over again. And she keeps saying no, you know, come with a new angle, figure out a new way that you can work together, a new collaboration. And the other thing is, you know, as you build this network, you're going to realize that more doors open, the more people are familiar with you through their friends, right? So if that door is closed now, but you're able to create friends with everyone else in his periphery, that door is going to open.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't want to name any guests, but it's a strategy that Johnny and I are using right now to bring guests on the show. Of like, we know that they're a solid no, but if we can have great interviews with everyone in their orbit, they're going to come around and they're going to see that, you know, the angle that we're presenting is pretty interesting. And it's a strategy that we're executing right now.
Cool.
So,
I like that.
Hot tip.
So it would be like, yeah, we'll dive into some of this after, because I got some interesting things to ask about. Save that for the next one. But cool. I think we've got a good time frame here. So
yeah.
To kind of end out, I just have I'll do a few rapid fires and then see where people can hear more. I think we already know one place. But I always like asking kind of favorite books. So you could either say related to, whether it's like social related, or just the 3 top books that you recommend the most, we'll say.
So right now it is Art of Possibility. It's a book that I recommend to all of our clients who are signing up for boot camp. And it really talks about how to frame things when obviously we have conversations that matter and conversations that are difficult. And it's all about positioning yourself with the intentions that help the other person, and figuring out how to frame so that they feel good about taking that next step. I think so many of us come into the situation like, I want this, I need this, how do I get this? And we don't realize that through the power of language, we can actually allow the other person to see that, yeah, they want that too. So Art of Possibility, definitely. I also love Mark Manson's Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I know everyone loves it at this point, so probably everyone's already read it.
I still haven't yet, actually. My girlfriend has, and it's literally on my bookshelf, but tell me why I need to read this thing next, put on the list.
Well, I think it's something that is a continuing struggle for all of us. And I don't, you know, it's funny, we have guests on the show, and just yesterday we were talking to Jay Shetty, and we were asking him this exact thing, like self-doubt, right? Here you are, hundreds of millions, billions of views at this point. You know, you got to feel on fire with your video making. You got to feel like, oh, everything's going to hit. How do you deal with that perfectionism, self-doubt? And, you know, obviously not have thin skin either. It's so hard when you get negative comments. And when I find myself falling into a rut of, you know, I'm beating myself up, I'll pick up that book and flip back through it. So it's been, you know, read through a number of times now. And then let's see, a third book. Adam Grant's Give and Take.
Cool. I haven't heard of that one. Yeah.
Mindset book, same thing. So one of the core concepts that we teach at the Art of Charm Bootcamp is this idea of giving value. And when we find ourselves in a place of just giving without intention of anything in return, as Adam Grant would say, a pure giver and not a matcher. You know, a matcher is someone who sort of keeps a running tally of like, okay, you know, Wade's bought 3 drinks, so now I'm going to make sure that I buy him 3 drinks. And we're always kind of, okay, he's done this, now I got to do this. Giving without intention of getting something back. And I know obviously Gary Vee is all about the same concept. The giving of value that we talk about really is in 3 areas. It's giving someone attention, which obviously we know about these devices, like, and that consumes our attention. So when you can actually be fully present with someone, you're giving them value. Appreciating them for accomplishments, achievements, what's going on in their life, what you know matters to them is a powerful way to give someone value. And the last thing is acceptance. And that's really inviting them into your life, you know, saying, hey, come to this party with me. Hey, let's go to dinner together. Those 3 things, if we can focus on giving that to everyone in our lives, whether it's the barista, whether it's our friends, whether it's our family, now we're playing from a more successful place. And Adam Grant, as a researcher and a Harvard professor, he looked at givers, takers, and matchers in a corporate environment. And of course, a lot of us think, oh, takers, they get ahead, right? They're just constantly looking out for themselves. They're selfish, and that's how they get ahead. And what Adam found in his research that's so fascinating is, like, if we think about a success bell curve, right? You have no success, and then everyone's kind of average, and then you have, very few people with high success. Givers actually end up on both ends of the success bell curve. So givers definitely get walked all over, but givers also end up in the C-suite and very successful in their career. So he did a good job of looking at what makes those smart givers so successful, and I think it's an actionable book that anyone can pick up and get something from.
Sweet. I like that. I think, we'll just do final question. And what would be the best place for people to find out more about you?
Well, we do have a podcast.
Interesting.
It's the Art of Charm podcast. You can go to The Art of Charm. You can find us in Spotify, Google Play, and iTunes as The Art of Charm. And then if you want to take your social skills to the next level, we started in the dating realm, and we were talking about this earlier. Our content still is relevant when we're trying to increase our impact in our romantic relationships, but platonic, business, networking relationships, all areas where social skills, soft skills come into play. We have a week-long course here in sunny Los Angeles. You stay at our beautiful villa, and you learn from me and the team in person and fix things, in 7 days instead of consuming your 374th YouTube video on confidence. You can actually do something about it and build it.
Nice. And then what's the website? Artofcharm.com?
Theartofcharm.com.
With the Art of Charm.
We also own Art of Charm.
Okay,
but
so you got
redirect,
both.
so
Nice.
We'll catch them either way.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on my show, and thanks for letting me kind of hang out here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.